Good afternoon and welcome good afternoon for those of you in the UK or Canada, and good morning for those west of here. I've just brought together a group of individuals to talk about the use of AI in gaming, specifically focusing on ChatGPT. In this example, other brands are available. What we're going to do in the next sort of 60 minutes is try and talk through the things that you can see on the screen. So I'll do a quick introduction with the team. We're then going to have a sort of 101 for those who don't know how ChatGPT works. We'll then try and do a demonstration of ChatGPT playing Take That Hill, and discuss how this compares to a human player and to a more simple use of an AI system run using Python. We're then going to talk about how ChatGPT could be used or has been used to create courses of action for a more advanced game called Flashpoint Campaigns. And then the meat of the discussion will be looking at how AI and ChatGPT could be used to support wargaming based on what we've seen and based on a previous conversation at Connections 23, which are the two PowerPoint screenshots shown below. So without further ado, I'll nominate Dr. Dan Epstein to introduce first, then I'll go to Francis and Mark.
Thanks, Ed. So I'm Dr. Dan Epstein. I'm actually a medical doctor. I'm a GP in Australia, but I also do a lot of tabletop exercising through my organisation, the Long Game Project, and I have been tinkering around with ChatGPT. I wouldn't say that I'm a coder by any means, but I can definitely hack things together. And yeah, it's interesting. I'm really looking forward to the discussion today.
Cool. Francis.
Francis Heritage, so ex-Royal Navy Principal Warfare Officer and Fighter Controller, so Surface Warfare Officer and Weapon Controller in sort of US parlance. Now a reservist, but I also work for an AI company called Faculty in the UK. We're the UK's largest AI company. We're OpenAI's only technical partner. And as a member of the defence team at Faculty, I've been sort of overseeing a large amount of large language model work with various sort of elements of UK MOD, particularly around augmenting decision-making, and in some cases, operational planning and playing games, particularly certain types of war game where large language models could help you get more out of the game than you're currently getting. So yeah, things like sort of GPT-4, GPT-4 Turbo, and open source models, comparing how they perform against each other. And yeah, just really interesting to discuss and share how we see it going.
And Mark.
Cool. Gosh, yes, I'm Dr. Mark Flanagan as well, but not a medical doctor, computer science doctor, specialising in AI of 2006. So I have a master's in AI back in 1990, where it was a lot of symbolic logic and expert systems floating around. Came back and did a PhD in 2000 on intelligent tutoring systems and kind of the learning side of that. That's my background. My day job, I'm a solution architect in the NHS. Interestingly, I've been given kind of remit to look at the systems intelligence side of AI for a large NHS procurement. So the ChatGPT stuff and the large language models is of interest to me in another discipline, but sliding that across over to the war games. The absent partner, Ian Robinson, I mentioned that sort of, although he's a physicist by background and sort of 30 years of chemical industry experience, one of the things that's got the synergy here is problem solving. Was actually a lot of search and optimization on real chemical plants, and designed experiments may come into a conversation later in point, which is also like an evaluation technique. And that's related to Take That Hill and what we did with the Python script and Phil Savman's original game.
Cool. And I'm Ed Farron. I'm an infantry major, so I'm absolutely the least intelligent person on this call. Proud to be so. I was the second sort of seat designer on Take That Hill. The version that you see now which was marketed by UK Fight Club. The original was Professor Phil Sabin, who's already been mentioned. And then Mark and Ian helped me through with the sort of playtesting to final production. Well, that concludes the introductions. Dan, could you, in very layman's terms, for the other infantry crayon eaters who might be out there, explain how ChatGPT works and sort of the language model phrase that was used, just sort of expand on that a little bit, because that might not be common knowledge.
Well, I'm probably the least out of three of us to best explain how language models work, I think. But look, I think from my perspective as like a game designer and someone who can play around with these types of things, probably the thing to take into a consideration with language models is, you know, they're very good at passing a bunch of information and then finding the relationships between those things. So, you know, if you and they work with their input and their output being language. So they kind of speak our language going in, and then they do their thing on the inside with lots and lots of complicated maths and floating point matrices, and then at finding connections between things, spit out something on the other side, which then again makes sense to us. So I think that it's a little bit of kind of for other people looking at it, but it has a little bit of a black box effect, in that you put things in, you're not really sure what's happening, and then something comes back out. But it's meant to communicate on us on either side. So I think that's the most important thing to keep in mind with this kind of application is you need to think about how you communicate into the black box in the language model, and then on the other side, when you get something back out, how to close that loop back to it. In terms of like how they work on the inside at a high level, maybe it's best for the other two to kind of explain on a high level what's going on for people to understand. But I think from a low level, it's important to just understand what you're saying and what your kind of aims are to use it as a tool, rather than thinking it's a big thing that, you know, as a tool can like throw something into it and then it just gives you the correct answer. It's about learning how to like drive it and how to use it as well.
Okay, I think Francis might be the next person to take it on. Just before I get to Francis, just say one of the things that my experience of using ChatGPT, and I've the very only basic playing around, was that you have to ask it the right questions to get the right answer, like a lot of things. And there's a whole sort of side industry brewing up online about what prompts to use and the right prompts, and to sort of train your AI to get you the answers. And hopefully that's the sort of lesson about not getting upset with it when it first gives you the wrong answer to the first thing. So I'll let Francis carry on.
Yeah, I guess just a thing on terminology first, which is ChatGPT is a brand name for OpenAI. So it's the name of their chatbot, but there are different models owned by OpenAI that sit under ChatGPT. So you know, GPT-4, GPT-4 Turbo, GPT 3.5, these are all different models that you can select that sit underneath the hood of ChatGPT. So the GPT stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer, and that pre-trained bit is quite important because there is a huge corpus of text that these models have been trained on. And with that corpus of text comes sort of ideas about the world, it comes potentially biases. So if you run different versions of GPT through the political compass, it comes up in different places. And you've also got what are called sort of open source versions as well. So the end result of all this training, and this also involves a lot of human beings labeling different sentences as positive or negative, or saying what they're actually talking about as well, are a set of weights which help the model understand how words relate to each other. So when people say sort of GPT is thinking or ChatGPT is understanding, the terminology is not quite right. It's just a calculator. It's just trying to calculate the probable next best word that you're looking for the answer you want. It doesn't really think, it calculates. It's just a really, really good word calculator that has been trained on a vast corpus of text. And essentially it works by calculating the next best word for the answer that you want. Open source versions that are now freely available have sometimes taken similar weights and tuned them in different ways, and they can perform really strangely. And we're only really now starting to get to grips with the best way to put sort of guardrails on these things. So something called retrieval augmented generation, where essentially you tell it to only provide answers from a certain database, is a new idea that we've come up with. Other ways you can sort of keep it constrained to being used as well. You can fine tune them to only talk about certain subjects or focus on certain subjects, or you completely train a new model on only the data that you want it to look at, but that's really expensive. And so now trying to understand, is a really big model that you talk to in a particular way preferable to a slightly smaller model that you can talk to in a more general way? There's loads of different options. So it's a word calculator at the end of the day.
Cool. I think your sort of diligence to the terminology is really key, and a lot of senior officers, God bless them, from an older generation, often confuse and misidentify everything that you've just said, and yeah, I think it's really important to actually know what the thing is doing, because you can sort of attribute it with powers that possibly it doesn't have, and give it maybe too much credit, or not understanding the key value that the human at the front end has in getting the outcome at the back end. Okay, so Dan, are we able to fire up on your computer and share screen for the bot that you made for Take That Hill, and then we'll just do a couple of try and do a couple of turns, and I will replicate it on screen using Tabletop Simulator.
Yeah, for sure. So I will I'll go ahead and share my screen now. Give me a second to load it up. Let me know when you guys can see it. It says my screen share is loading. That's really strange. I haven't seen that before. Can you guys see my screen yet or not?
No, I'll try to stop sharing mine. There you go.
There we go. Yep. Okay. So what we've got here is just a bit of an empty chat bot with what I kind of put together, which is using the kind of new agent models that ChatGPT has, and this one underneath, as Francis was talking about, is ChatGPT 4. So essentially, look, I haven't done actually too much building of this thing. I've just done going back to what Francis was talking about, a little bit of context awareness as well as a little bit of uploading of extra data. So essentially here, what we've got is an agent which has the rules in the form of a PDF uploaded to it, so it knows Take That Hill in terms of what the words are inside of that PDF. And I think that's important, because these are some of the talking points which I expect to talk about. Is that when you're talking about war games, I think language models are very good at understanding language, but in terms of understanding strategy and images and those types of things, I think that changes its understanding of what's going on. So what we've got here is underneath it, it has access to the main PDF rule set of Take That Hill, and it's got some extra guidance and prompting for context on top of it. So in terms of that, it basically knows that it's a chatbot that can help us learn how to play Take That Hill, give us some understanding about potentially scenarios. It has 2 understandings of the game, one with the basic rules and one with the advanced rules. And I've kind of told it that, hey, maybe you'll be used to teach people how to play. Maybe you'll be used to play against. Maybe it'll be used for a kind of pass and play game board with 2 different people. So let's have a look. So I've got some prompts down at the start here. So let's say start a new game. So this is kind of interesting, because I've told it also to represent the game board with ASC2 drawings. So I've told it to kind of give us back a little bit of what the game board actually looks like. Let me just see if it's actually going to do anything. There we go. Affirmative. It uses the right wargaming language. So gives you a little bit of the objective, a little bit of an understanding about the game board layout. Blue team setup. Game board, it's going quite slowly because it's using the higher language model. So here we go. It's going to try and draw the game board, which I think is kind of an interesting application. Was my kind of solution on how to do it. This is interesting. So it does this after a couple of play tests with it. It either, because the game board is obviously hexagonal, so sometimes it does this and just represents it in squares. Other times it will actually use kind of dashes to try and get the hexagons right, but it doesn't do it kind of consistently. So it's kind of interesting to kind of think about. But if we think about the rows there, and it says, please specify your initial placement. So this is, I guess we can kind of discuss together how we want to do this. I think there's a couple of ways that you can kind of use this. At this point, I guess we could try and get it to draw the game board a bit more accurately. We could maybe ask it to teach us how to play, or we could ask it to be a certain type of player, or a bit of a teacher or a guide. What do you want to do, Ed?
So because the game's quite a simple solitaire system, I think there's more value in letting the bot play blue against sort of itself solitaire red rather than us playing blue against solitaire red because the actions are so limited for the red side.
Okay. So should we just tell it to play the blue team?
Yeah, if we need to play red to interface, that's all good.
Okay. Let's just say, let's imagine us saying, you play as blue, I'll play as red.
This has
What
got
should the
sort of
first move be?
shades of the War Games film with Whopper.
Okay, so they're assuming blue forces. The first moves, strategic considerations include positioning infantry platoon to maximize effectiveness while minimizing exposure to enemy fire. Here's the initial setup for blue. So Ed, do you want to do these in your tabletop simulator? Because it's going to look a lot better than the
Yeah,
slightly wonky
I'll try
game
and
board
follow
of
through,
the.
but we'll try and avoid doing too many screen swaps. So
Yes, yeah.
we'll sort of wait till we get the first sort of contact maybe, and then switch screens. So I'll just put it. So the HQ is in B1. Okay.
Maybe Ed is the game design, or probably the best context the game designer here. You can comment on the opening moves.
Yeah, that's a pretty standard setup. HQ is central, and the sections are all in their individual hexes.
Yeah, so I guess it's going to try and draw the game board here.
Okay. So it looks like he's moving one section to Alpha 2, and B section 2 is staying, and he's moving section 3. So this is a 2-move 1-fire strategy, which is going to limit the amount of fire going on to red, but will mean that in the next turn, more troops will be forward to create a better fire base for subsequent turns.
Are you aware in the rule set that this is listed as like a suggested open move, or is this something that is just a pretty common kind of move that it would be suggesting based on the rules?
I think it's a common opening move because you have a clear line of fire in the center, and both your moving sections are equidistant in terms of the rallying mechanism from the HQ. But it's not a doctrinally sort of, well, you wouldn't see this in a doctrinal infantry pamphlet. You tend to try and have one thing suppressing, one thing moving, and one thing reserve, which then travels behind. So you probably see 2 sections moving on one flank or the other. I did learn over a couple of beers in the bar that this is how the Danish kind of do it, because they do it the other way around, where they have the 2 flanking sections firing, and you move in effectively the cone of death in the middle and just hope you don't get hit from the sides, which seems crazy, but it works for them.
Ed, what do you want to do as red on the return?
I think we'll target S1 in at the top in Alpha 2.
Sorry, I'm kind of leaning over to type. So target S1 in A2?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see what it suggests is if we just put in very simple prompts, and I like to kind of test it by putting in just what I think lazy people would put in. So I think that's quite interesting to see how much context they can get out of just very simple return instructions. Let's have a look. So during the enemy action phase, red horses on the hill will engage BS1. The distance is 4 hexes. Determine the effectiveness of the red forces fired dice roll is required. So here we go. It's using the GPT kind of code plugin, I guess, to do a little bit of dice rolling. So we can actually click this. Let's have a look behind the scenes of what's actually happening. So here we go. Starting a random dice roll, using a range, resulting in a hit. So there we go. Dice rolled a 2. That's an ineffective turn. Right, it's fresh and unaffected. So it's as far as I understand, because I am a little bit new to take that hill, it's correctly interpreting the rules as far as I can see so far.
Yeah, so the red player has to roll I think equal to or over, and blue has to roll over. So it is correctly counted the number of hexes, which is 4. So it needed a 4, 5, or 6 to hit the section as
Right.
targeted. And if it rolled a 2, then that would be ineffective. So low being less effective, and a higher number being more effective.
Yeah. Did you want to do anything else on Red's turn there? I've just told it to kind of go ahead for another turn
No,
before.
that's it. That's it. So it
One of the
goes straight
thoughts I
to.
had with this is that if you want to, one of the things that I like about the ChatGPT interface is you can go back and you can change prior prompts. So I actually like this as maybe an idea to, at some points within the game, go back and change what your move would have been. So you can almost think of your prompt entries as you go through the chat history as save states in your game.
Yeah.
So you can go back and change those points in time.
What I do just want to check is, after the did we have a blue firefight roll from Bravo 1 to Bravo 6? Because
Interesting.
if you
Let's
go back
see,
up,
because they're coming up with their term
yeah.
now.
Yeah.
Should they have had a return fire?
So unless I missed it, they should have. We sort of went from movement to enemy, and we may have skipped firefight and rally, which are the 2 subsequent phases. So we should have seen 2 section roll with only a 1 in 6 chance of hitting, and then we should have seen 2 rally rolls for 1 and 3 section, which should have had I think 3, 3, 4, 5, or 6 chance of hitting, chance of rallying.
Let's just ask it a little bit more vaguely. Let's consider that we are like a non expert player. Should we have seen a rally roll in any other moves this turn or after this? Let's just ask it and see if it prompted a little bit and see if it knows or can correct itself a little bit. You are correct. After the enemy action phase, proceed with the rally phase of the blue forces, followed by turn movement phase. It's no beauty, it's a hit.
It's not quite correct. It's the rally phase
before
right. Red action phase. But that's to be expected with the sort of the way sometimes ChatGPT does responses.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, well, let's continue on just for the purpose of moving things forward. New moves turn as blue player. They will move the S1 to A2, say fresh. S2 to HQ, move from B1, B2.
So we'll assume it's done its rally
C3.
roll, and it was all fresh, so that's fine. Okay. Happy. It's moving 1 section again.
Yep.
No,
Anything
sorry,
you want to do in return, Ed?
Sorry, so 1 section staying where it is. B2. Okay, so effectively, it's doing a 2 up, 1 back. It's moving its rear force up, and it's going to fire with the 2 sections there. Has it done the roll for the firefight? Because as the red player, I can only act if I'm not suppressed.
Let's ask it. Yeah, so these are the interesting things I think you learn when you're prompting it to do things. It'll
the calculation
kind of
seems accurate. It just might be not necessarily understanding the phasing.
Yeah. So it looks like one of my reflections on building this was that I think if you're planning to just upload a rule set and then have it read that rule set, you kind of have to think about writing your rule set in a friendly way for the language model. Do you know what I mean? Like, you have to write it in a way which makes very logical sense in a written format, how your game's logic flows in terms of the phases, in terms of how things are visually represented as well. Like, I think diagrams in rule sets will have to have accompanying text, if that makes sense, for language models to maybe understand
yeah, sure,
a little bit
can't
more.
read the images. Yeah, I do wonder, having sort of corrected it.
I think Francis wants to chime in with something.
Yeah,
they can read images, but it'll be inconsistent. So my sort of GPTs for the war game just gone, it understood sort of APP7 symbology, but not the size of units. So it couldn't get sort of difference between sort of sections, battalions, etc. But it knew what they were. But that'll only get better, obviously.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
so Dan, question on this though. After having played it through and sort of given it some corrective tweaks, will the bot be, if you run it again, as in go back to the start menu and press start, would it be a bit better at understanding the phraseology because of the play that we've done? As in, are we training it to be better at the game? Francis
Yeah,
is
I mean,
nodding
I
emphatically.
think
So
yeah, I think the true answer is probably yes. But I don't know if we can know that for certain because OpenAI doesn't say that it specifically does, but I would imagine that it probably does learn from your inputs
because
while you're
what I'm
training it.
sort
But
of
you
getting
can,
at is we could train it to be better than the playthrough we've seen here, rather than saying
yes,
this is what you would go for straight away. Yeah, Mark.
yes.
I unmuted. Cool. Yeah, I was going to say in defense of ChatGPT, there's plenty of human players who get rules wrong on the first reading of that rule sets, and it's interesting what it easily picks up, and it's the nuances that it hasn't quite got right just yet. Ed picked up on the sequence of play and the tempo time relationship between who does what when. It's a starting point, and this is the question. I'm going back to both Francis and Dan with respect to the LLM being customized to your one for the Take That Hill game, because out of the box it's pretty impressive how it orientates and where it thinks it is, but it's like coming down from a helicopter. You've got to orientate yourself and then sort of get your bearings, and you'll be corrected on subtle things. So I don't want to drag on that point, but
Yeah,
I'm
I was thinking
impressed.
about the sort of how could this help a new player play the game. So rather than necessarily it playing the game as the bot, you are sort of saying like, I want to move from here to here, and it says illegal, legal, or like yes, and you now
Mm,
flip the counter, something along those lines, which I think it seems to have the have the ability to do quite easily.
yeah, yeah. I think as a rules reference, it should be very useful. You know, especially with large, like big, thick rule sets. I think that was one of my main talking points and one of my main outputs out of this is that
Mm.
I think it would be very good at rules referencing,
Yeah, and one of the things
or it
I'd
should
say is
be.
that we're trying to digitize this game to not for monetary purposes, but to scale its contact area with the non-war gamers because it's a primer. So we're trying to get it onto mobiles and browsers. And that a game design company would use this and do the sort of pathfinding decision-making model. So it would effectively create only the legal moves and all the rest of it. So the user is tied into playing the game accurately because you cannot play the game inaccurately, which is out with the problem set of a board game where players can do things wrong and sort of understanding the rules. But the point of ChatGPT in this example is says that if you've done this by just scanning a PDF of a war game, then this is applicable to, in theory, anything. Vice having to pay a developer $25,000 and 6 months or whatever to develop that path command finding thing to lock in a game to be 100% accurate. So whilst this demonstration might not have been 100% accurate, the fact that it's just basically read the rules and it's having a go and it's doing pretty good. Again, not being a human and not being a war gamer, I think there's sort of quite a lot of potential there.
Yeah. Is there anything you want to play around with it more, Ed? Do you want to test it in certain capacities?
I've,
Yeah, Mark.
Yeah.
Also, Francis.
oh yeah, I might go for an idea. And so at one point before I sort of raise it, so Ed, at the start of the game, you were calling it he, and about halfway through, you stopped and switched to calling it, which I thought was quite interesting. Uh, but last week, a researcher in the States sort of published his details on something he's called Chess GPT, which is a GPT 3.5 turbo model that he slowly taught to play chess, or actually quite quickly taught to play chess to a relatively good standard by feeding it the rules and sharing it with, or sharing with it sort of open source successful games. And he thinks it's begun to develop the behavior of trying to figure out the sort of chess score of the human player it's up against and is tweaking its moves appropriately. It's not thinking that, it's calculating that, but this is the other interesting thing about GPT's transformers. They're demonstrating this behavior called inference, which we haven't seen in AI systems before. So that they are demonstrating the ability to undertake new tasks without having been specifically trained to do them. Most AI models up to now, you've got to train it to do one thing. It does that one thing really well, play Go, play chess, but won't do anything else. This is one of the reasons why these models are so different. They can understand new tasks when the amount of training data they've been given reaches a certain unknown level. They suddenly get how to do something new. But a really cool thing to do now might just be to ask it to tell it the game is finished and say, please provide feedback on both the red and blue performance. How would you improve them next time?
Yeah, okay.
Because actually the flip side of the game you just had, the record of that game, the model has, and I'm not sure whether it's GPT-4 or 3.5. You've got GPTs, it must be GPT-4, I guess, in the background.
Yeah.
It potentially can now take all that and feed you something. And
Yeah.
if you don't like what
Yeah,
it said, you can give it a sort of theoretical slap on the wrist. Bad model, improve, do this better next time.
Yeah.
And so keep that sort of feedback loop going until it gives you what you want.
So here we go. It's having a little bit of an analysis of blue. So that's itself for the moment. So blue's movement has been cautious, advancing one section at a time whilst keeping others in reserve, minimizing risk, but too slow to achieve objective efficiency, possibly. Firefight effectiveness so far, the attempts have been ineffective due to dice rolls. The strategy to engage from distance is sound, though. Use of HQ, the platoon HQ has been kept, which is good practice for rallying purposes. However, there hasn't been a need to rally yet. Suggestions, increase aggressiveness, alternate firing and moving, rotate which sections fire and which move in each turn, and red performance analysis, target selection. So red choose to target the closest unit. This is a logical choice. Use of terrain. We're using the defensive strategy, the defense of the hill effectively. However, red's actions are limited by the rules to remain actively fire. Suggestions, prioritize threats, anticipate blue's movements a bit more. Overall strategy for blue, a more dynamic approach with coordinated movement might yield better results. For red, maintain focus on their most immediate threats to be prepared to adapt for fire if blue changes approach. That seems pretty reasonable so far. What do you think, Ed?
Yeah, I'd say it's broadly right, but the movement strategy on turn 1 was 2 sections forward. On turn 2, it was 1 section forward. So I wouldn't say it's accurate to say it's been cautious 1 section at a time. If you think there's 4 options, there's super bold, which is move everything, and there's super cautious, which is move nothing, and then you've got cautious move 1 and bold move 2. It went bold, cautious, and that's kind of what Mark's kind of Python option matrix came up with, where I think from hexes 3 to 5 you move 1 fire with 2, and then from hex 3 forward you move 2 fire with 1. Mark?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, sort of there's so much around this is actually tingling with interest. So I'm writing things down I want to squeeze in. With respect to your options at the start, when the return fire at you is likely to miss, be bold and move. Get to that point where the tipping point where your suppressive fire will cool off the red defenders, so you could send somebody up the middle to storm it. Now, this has been played down the local war game club as well, and a chap I respect very well said this is the British Army, bags of smoke and flank left, on the notion that give yourself a fire base, suppress, and you have a storming group going in. There's that mathematical tipping point in discovering it, and then, because one of the fascinating things is when I was actually playing a run through with Ed, my maths element overtook the common sense element, whereby you're looking for something that's assured, whereas in infantry training, which Ed brings in with buckets, is actually get there fast, and then you are in control. I don't know if I've explained myself well there, but the notion is that, and I've actually pulled out from the Take That Hill. Can you see the
Yeah,
diagram?
the
You
relationship.
remember it? That's the key thing that Chat GPT is trying to construct at this point in time. And to ask it to get it first time is an impossible ask. But the fact the thing it will continually learn, it's a bit like that junior officer you're training, Ed, at Sandhurst. They get it through iteration. Perfect. Yeah. That in games design term is an interactive dynamic influence diagram or a state transition diagram. And that's the thing that ChatGPT is searching for.
I just wonder, can I ask Francis? So this is one thing that I was thinking about throughout this, is that understanding that, dynamic environment is the thing that player has to kind of formulate in their head as they're playing. And the best way to represent that for us to kind of get it is through quite a complicated diagram like that, even though it is a simple game. If that diagram was better represented in text, so if you could really text out that whole diagram, do you think that GPT would be better at understanding the relationships between it, even though a human probably wouldn't? So, like, as a human, that visualization of the relationships probably makes more sense. But as a language model, if you actually to write out all the relationships there in a gigantic, block of text that we couldn't contain the context of in our own heads, but the language model might, do you think it would be better represented in the way the game would be played, or the tax would be played by the language model?
Yeah, potentially. Particularly if you're sort of showing it as like an image or sort of words. There is another sort of technical approach, even more under the hood than that, called a knowledge graph, which is where you're able to sort of link information together with sort of nodes and connections in a mathematical way that on a bit of paper would look like exactly what you've got on the screen there, but is actually mathematically joined together.
Yeah.
And when we're now at the stages of using knowledge graphs to talk to LLMs as well, and putting something like that together is becoming increasingly straightforward. But so the short answer is yes. But
Yeah,
even
so I guess what I was thinking is, for people who are game designers like me, or for hobbyist wargamers, or for people who have rule sets that are, historical, who want to utilize, more plug and play solutions like ChatGPT, is one kind of idea to start thinking about your, documents that you upload and your instructions that you give much more in the form of like interpretable language rather than images. So for us putting this together, it would be easy to come up with the image.
Yeah.
But if you're thinking about your rule sets in the future, is it better to, have a variable version of the rules that just contain all text and descriptions of diagrams to then upload?
So the short answer is yes, with the advantage that as these models improve their ability to sort of do visual understanding, they'll meet in the middle and they'll get it. I mean, have you tried feeding that image as an image to GPT-4, this diagram here? Because if not, while you guys speak, I'll pass it across to it and see
Yeah.
what I get.
Yeah, go for it.
That whole conversation's sort of been a really good, I think, example of how we often say in infantry, like, we're visual learners and I need a diagram and I can't read lots of text, etc. And that's absolutely the sort of reverse problem with the LLM that you said, that it requires text. So the fusion of turning a thought into a graphic and then writing about that graphic and then sort of turning that into more text to explain the graphic in a more detailed way, so something effectively with our eyes can understand it. It's an interesting one.
Yeah, I think especially in just the context and the relationships between things. I think that's pretty important.
Yeah, and Mark's point about sort of the maths, this is where I feel as a military professional using wargaming, is that you shouldn't be doing the sort of Las Vegas kind of like know the stakes, know the odds, because you can't do that in real war. You don't know you got a 73% chance of victory. But what you do know is that, generally speaking, the closer you are to the enemy, the more accurate your fire and their fire is. And so it's sort of have it, and rules need to obviously come into percentages and fractions and all the rest of it. Otherwise, they don't work, and you end up in the free Kriegspiel space. But I really try and avoid having too much sort of where you can just like meta-analyze it all, because I feel that it's more about how you feel about the situation. You are cautious because you would feel cautious. Whether if you work the stats out, then maybe you decide to be bold. But if you get one hit against one of your sections and that turn count, the hit counter goes up at the bottom, then maybe you become cautious, even though statistically nothing's changed. So there's that whole moral, psychological aspect to war and war gaming, which I feel should always be at the fore, and the statistical back end is there to run the game, but should not become the sort of the front end.
Yeah, I think that's actually like a really good reason as to why LLMs could be more useful in having more immersion in that way. Like if you try and get it to skin its, like I've asked it to respond like, you know, someone who's teaching at a military academy. But if you ask it to respond like you're in a movie or as a like a dungeon master with much more descriptive terminology and much more engaging emotive language, perhaps that would actually immerse people a bit more in terms of what's happening. Instead of just having a game board representation, you could have much more descriptive kind of terminology to kind of cue those emotions in people.
Yeah, you mean when you give the bot a persona to feed back to you?
Yes, I guess in interpreting what happens to be a bit more descriptive or a bit more like immersive in the way that it presents things to you, and so you can feel those hits are, you know, hits to real people or whatever, you know, to make your decisions a little bit more like you
Yeah,
were on
you
the
can
ground.
generate casualty names just to really stick it in there. Yeah, and a guy who's not on the call, who Kevin Williamson, also in the Fight Club Enterprise, he was taking the sort of Lua scripting output from command scenarios, which is an infinitely more complicated game, very technocratic with the sort of platform missiles and PK, chance to kill, chance to hit, all that sort of stuff going on all the time. And he then put it into an LLM to say, like, give me a narrative story of what's going on, and you could then make it more storyteller, i.e., more engaging, or you could make it more sort of cold and kind of statistical, depending on the persona that you gave it. And I thought that was a really good way, because you can play these scenarios and produce all these Lua scripts automatically, and then feed it into the LM and get your narrative without having to have somebody laboriously trying to sort of do a blow by blow, which often is really hard to understand because you're only seeing an image layer as a human. All the Lua scripting is going on in the background. Francis, how are you doing with the?
So I think it's got one of the other arrows the wrong way around, but otherwise seems to be okay. So I don't know if you're happy to share the diagram again, then I'll share what the
Yeah,
model seems to think it's looking at in terms of all the arrows. So the diagram depicts the strategic interplay between various actions in a tactical game scenario, where blue represents friendly forces and red represents the enemy. Each action has a consequence that either increases the opportunity for or reduces the impact of another action. Here is the breakdown. Red fire. This indicates the enemy's offensive capability. Intensification of it diminishes the friendly force's ability to move, disperse, and concentrate. Blue fire. This signifies friendly forces' offensive capability. Increasing blue fire enhances the chance to perform a blue rally. So that's arrows the wrong way around, but not far off, which could be a defensive or regrouping maneuver. Blue move represents the friendly forces movement. Enhanced movement allows for increased dispersion and concentration of friendly forces, which can also boost the blue rally capability. Again, it's got the arrow the wrong way around. Dispersion, again, a description there, a tactic to reduce concentration of friendly forces, making them less susceptible to red fire. Concentration, potentially to increase offensive power or defensive resilience, makes friendly forces more vulnerable to red fire. And then, yeah, blue rally, it's got the arrow the wrong way around again. So from that screenshot, it's got all of that. And like I say, a couple of those arrows are the wrong way around, but about 60%, not far off.
Which were the arrows that were the wrong way around? Just an
So
interesting.
it thinks blue fire increases the opportunity to conduct blue rally, which actually is.
To the bottom arrow on this diagram.
Yeah.
Well, that's a beautiful example of what, okay, Gen AI says a hallucination, but you can relatively straightforwardly, by prompt engineering, as in train it, that's not quite true. And one of the things I was going to say is that I came from the opposite direction from Ed with respect to never had to yomp up a hill and trying to take anything. And when I was playing Take That Hill, I was coming from that mathematical gameism. Now, to me, that's a much more dangerous approach, because from a kind of my time in academia with surrounded by people researching in games, unrealisms that creep into games are much more dangerous false lessons to learn. And the one advantage of ChatGPT is that sort of, if it gets it wrong, you can train it towards the right. Whereas my old background from the 1990s AI and even 2000 AI is that the rule-based inference, you were searching for the right rule that doesn't really exist out there. There's too many shades of grey to pin things down. And the good thing about kind of the Gen AI side of things, you can make it more your own tool rather than effectively throw it back to the programmers who may introduce more or different errors in trying to fix an error that you've highlighted to them. So there's a lot of talk about, is this a death of programming? It's a transformation of programming, because the logicians, I think, are taking a step back, and they're trying to actually create a much more, what should we say, an environment that people relate to and have some control over.
You know, talking about it as a tool, like for me, it was really good to very quickly upskill in how to learn how to play. Take that hill to begin with. Like, I hadn't actually read through the rule set until I kind of started to tinker with this. And so for me, it was very useful to like upskill me in terms of what's going on, summarize, you know, what the overall objectives are, instead of having to read a quite, you know, very structured rule set. It was able to orient me very quickly.
Well, I
Hey,
think
sorry about that, guys. You might not have noticed I dropped out completely, but I'm back. Sorry, Mark, carry on. Go.
We were still talking. We were talking regardless, because I think ChatGPT just needs an equivalent diagram to understand the sequence of play. Then I think you'd have a very much stronger true representation of the game. Because I don't know if I could slip onto sort of when I constructed the Python game, that was me trying to go through the ball aching of rule encoding into an environment and understanding the language that Phil had created and getting a representation of it. Now, interestingly, in doing that, I noticed I discovered there was like a rule singularity in the last row gameplay, that if you put all your units into that last row, they're going to be under the original rules before the Take That Hill box set was produced, that you'd find everybody just pinned. Now, there was two things came from it. The NCOs being able to rally their own section, and that, how can I say, it was an emergent discovery that wasn't intended by the original designer. So there's dragons beware everywhere. And the good thing that I would say that ChatGPT approach, rather than rule-based engine that is only accessible to a few, is that you have control to explore that. And that's one of the things that myself and Ian did with the designed experiments. Rather than just playing it in a sensible fashion, the technique that we sort of borrowed from the chemical industry that Ian was familiar with, tried a lot of sensible and a lot of crazy things, and then on the basis of what was working, tried the better combinations to find out an optimal solution, which wasn't necessarily the game and designer's original intent. But I don't know if that's covered my Python side of things, or if there's any more questions associated with that.
I think we're going to come on to it, but the sort of the perception of maybe traditional designers to using ChatGPT or AI in general. Francis, are you good to talk about Koa development and Flashpoint?
Yeah, so I essentially did exactly what Dan did, which was take the various PDFs for the rules for Flashpoint campaigns, sort of AP5, which is a PDF online, AJP5, which is the NATO sort of operational planning version of AP5 and freely available online, and not classified in any way. Took all of those, created a GPTs out of it, which is essentially, as sort of Dan showed just then with the Take That Hill, allowing GPT-4 to access PDF documents, and told it to essentially give me a 7-question estimate format. And it was okay. I also fed it sort of images from the game itself, so showed it screenshots of the map, and like I say, it sort of understood what some of those APP7 terminologies were, but not all of them. I had to feed it a bit more information to get something useful. But in terms of sort of rough ideas of what to do, it was sort of 60% there. So you still need an extra sort of 40% element of, well, no, that's a stupid idea because you'll run out of sort of, artillery rounds straight away, or that's not a great idea, you'll get shot down. But in terms of the sort of donkey work for the first 50, 60% of understanding the situation, it did a pretty good job. And so in my professional life, we're doing something similar for a UK sort of MOD client who I won't name, but if you find me on the gal, I'll see if they're going to let me talk about it. But I think I saw a similar thing here for sort of playing war games or for sort of the real world. When you're doing those 7 questions, it's the same for everyone, isn't it, really? Your sort of mission initiation, understand the problem, figure out what you've been told to do and why, COA development, COA analysis, and then refine the COA. And I think for this, as well as what we're doing for the MOD, without going into too much detail for them, but we're finding that if you use an AI, or in this case, a sort of a GPT, large language model, for elements of that planning process, rather than telling it to do the whole thing in one chunk, you get a much better outcome. So a large language model for stakeholder analysis, a large language model for center of gravity discovery, a large language model for risk analysis, really finely tuned to that 1 or 2 things, the sort of thing where I think I could probably now safely admit that your SO2, SO3 would copy and paste the PowerPoint slides from a previous similar looking operation or exercise. Actually, this time, you can get all that donkey work done out of the way, have those ideas presented to the wargamer, and actually you can spend more time thinking about it and refining it and less time trying to, do the donkey work. It frees up your sort of time to sort of be a bit more imaginative and come up with better ideas. So that's that isn't how I try to use it here. I try to do the whole thing in a one. But if you break it down for individual bits of the planning task, it works a bit better. So that's what I found worked best for me when I sort of refined down which bit of the operational planning thing I used it for. So it wasn't brilliant, but I think that was the reason why I tried to use it to do the whole thing.
You make an interesting point about hybridity, which I'm not sure often gets mentioned because it seems that the computer is solving the problems rather than the computer is allowing the human to do better that which only the human can do. So using the combat estimate, sort of like the sort of front end where you sort of work out what the F is going on and what you need to do, and then the sort of genius bit where in theory you come up with a super battle winning idea, and then the more boring bit about how you do actually fit that in time, space, and against physics, which often you've magicked away in the first half. It strikes me that maybe the computer aided aspect is the front and the back, and the middle bit of the sandwich should still remain very much the sort of the art of human thinking. But maybe we could shorten the whole terrible timeline, and we could invest more sort of energy into the middle from the human side and worry less about the front and the back end. Is that where you're sort of going?
Yeah, that's a much better way of putting it. And the really interesting thing is, as with anything, that you've got errors of commission. So it will say the wrong thing. They're easy to spot because you've seen it in front of you, you can fix it. But where you can now spend the time is errors of commission, sorry, other way around. Errors of commission, it says the wrong thing and you can see that quite easily and fix it. But what you can now spend more time doing is errors of omission, where it just hasn't said something that it should have said. And chances are human beings haven't said it either. So you can spend more time daydreaming out the window or daydreaming out the tent about what those errors of omission are and filling in the blanks that either you or the large language model hasn't seen. because those errors of commission either won't have happened or will have been made straight away and you can fix immediately.
I personally would really like an LLM to do the DSOM and the sync matrix, or start drafting the OSW based on because there's always that time delay about the plan on the map looks gorgeous. We've got 5 minutes to turn it into orders, and funny old thing, it doesn't bear full resemblance, true picture to the plan on the map, and then the boss keeps changing things last minute, and therefore you're building in errors, the Swiss cheese model, and then people on the ground, when you ask them what's going on, they haven't got a Scoobies, or they don't really get the plan, and so on and so forth. So sounds like a lot of stuff could be used there. Out of interest, have you seen the tournament we ran over Christmas? It's still going on, the Overture mission, Francis?
Yeah, I'm playing it right now and having
You're on
my
it, okay.
I'm playing
Well,
my having my arse handed to me. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it might be interesting we might try and bring you in to see if you want to feed the plans that people made to an LLM to see or ask it to do the front end bit, like we say, sort of, what is the key terrain? What are the SWOT analysis of the red force? What's the SWOT analysis of the blue force? The sort of death by product that we make people do. And this has been a great exercise in how some people are very comfortable with operating without a product template, and other people need it like they need a safety blanket. And maybe the LLM could help do some of that work. So you can, if you've got an hour, which is what Jim Storr and all the other sages say, we need to be faster at this stuff, then you focus that hour on, a battle-winning idea instead of an analysis of the problem set with no idea how to solve it. Okay, I think we're into the last point. Sorry, Mark, go.
We forgot. I am glad that you have chosen Flashpoint Campaign as an engine to explore the art of war, for want of a better word, because I do believe that holds together well as a good. How can I put it? Where it's hard to exploit, which means I think it makes you play fair. I was a little bit, how can I say, because the other system, which was it the close combat modern version of it,
combat mission,
I know it's got some good, but I do believe it has a very, very complicated interface, which to me I didn't relate to what was actually going on. But at least what I've got from Flashpoint Campaign is what you see is what you get, whereas there seemed to be a little bit of joystick tweakiness associated with combat mission. I do stand to be corrected, but the operational side of things, I thought Flashpoint Campaign was I'm going to use the word a superior product for it. That could be controversial, I don't know, and it's just from playing the initial version and actually from what I've seen of the Southern Storm. And I do apologise. I wanted to be involved, but I was pulled away from over Christmas with the family. Yeah.
I was thinking a real challenge for the bot would be to try and synthesize OWS into like a page, because my God, that system's complicated. But for good reason, because trying to do air, land, maritime, and sea and space all at the same time on the same board is a bit of a nightmare. So I think we're on to like point 7. We've talked some of these through, and I don't want to drag this on too long because I know people need to sort of get to the end of their day or the start of their day, depending on where you are. So open forum. Anyone want to sort of pick any of the boxes that we've not talked about or they feel strongly about?
I actually think there's a huge, I think that looking at the boxes, there's a huge use case, I think, for creating accurate personas. Like, I think that there's one thing that language models can do really well is kind of context. And one thing that humans can't do very well is escaping their own biases. So I think even the best of humans, when we are trying to learn as much as we can about being a persona of some sort that isn't yourself, or even is yourself in a different context, making decisions within a war game, or if you're trying to represent a adversary force or in my context, some other kind of business or something, then pardon me, I think there's a huge benefit here for large language models to get a whole heap of contextual language data from whoever that stakeholder is or whoever that persona is, and kind of apply that to the new context of the war game or whatever you're trying to game out. And I think that language models could probably put together a better instructional package than a human could probably do, imagining what it is like to be that stakeholder, because you can't really escape your own grounding and your own bias through your own eyes a lot of the time, even people who are professionally trained in it. And I think prompting to do that from a language model would be an incredibly powerful piece to bring into wargaming and tabletop exercising, purely because I think it lets us escape our own biases a bit. So I imagine that could be done through language models by either creating a good briefing or a good template or a good set of principles or rules to follow for someone to initiate actions, or they're probably not there yet, but imagining that they are that stakeholder or that adversary or that persona, and then you asking, hey, what do you want to do as this person or as this nation state or as this business? And I think it would be able to come up with really good reasoned examples as to what they would like to do.
Mark or Francis?
I'm having trouble actually reading that bottom slide. I was trying to jump to the connections thing, but the persona thing is fascinating, because if I be a bit controversial, it's one thing that's happened in the last year that I haven't been involved in at all with, but what seems to be in Ukraine is that everybody was taken aback by how well the Russians defended and used the assets that they had. Effectively made a minefield very, very, very difficult for Western forces to break through. And I know there's the element there that wasn't there from the Ukrainian perspective, but I think that was a genuine red player doing something that the blue player didn't expect. So the one thing that I've observed in Fight Club, whatever game system that you have, there's no other side that comes through. Everybody seems to be playing blue, even if they're wearing red. So I'm fascinated by Dan's comment, and it goes back to early characterizations of all war games, in the sense that, are you playing the pieces or are you actually playing the period?
Or are you playing the opponent?
Yeah, well, I was going to say you have to, and a dangerous thing is playing the mindset of the opponent you want them to have, as opposed to what they have.
Yeah, I mean, the really good people, like the chess masters, they're playing the opponent's game style rather than necessarily the situation on the board, and sort of setting mental traps for them further down the road. I mean, Francis might come in on this. We had a discussion about whether having mirrored matches where one player is playing both simultaneously red on game one and blue in game two was preferable to maybe forming a red cell of a couple of people who are happy to play red on all the matches and would play it to a sort of overarching coa, obviously with the ability to change as the tactical situation develops, but in the main they would play to an overarching coa, and they would try and be better red, as opposed to having this kind of like schizophrenic mirrored match going on. But they could even be a model where that coa is generated through an LLM that's then assessed the doctrine of the adversary that you wish to use, and you could even get intermittent updates where you could ask for 3 personas. I want a gung-ho aggressive general, I want a sort of middle of the road, and I want a cautious one. A long time ago, when I was a wee lad, I played Sid Meier's Gettysburg, and one of the things you could do when you played against the computers, you could set the opponent style, and it would, based on American generals in the Civil War, you have like cautious, sort of and aggressive, and then you had like direct and indirect and flexible, and so you could have sort of like 9 different variations, all using the same army in the same sort of setting. And that would be an interesting sort of thing, because often some players, some people planning style and execution style might work against this subset of an adversary who is direct and cautious, but if they have an indirect and aggressive opponent, they just go to pieces because they're mentally unable to cope with the the enemy coming at you in 5 different directions, because they would never do anything that bold. So that would
Yeah.
be an interesting sort of thing to throw in.
Just to add on top of that, Ed, some things that I've been thinking about is just how to modify personas as well. Like, I think that there's this one part of designing games that's really challenging is knowing how many layers of complexity and how many dynamic pieces you want to put inside of the game. So, for example, if we're having a war game about red team versus blue team, but then you want to understand how the economy kind of comes into the decision making behind people there, then one place to go to as a game designer is, okay, well, now I need to create a system for a game economy on the top of this, and to know about resource management, and that's the tool which changes people's decision making about what they're going to do in what we're actually interested in, which is the combat situation or the another situation. But with language models, what you could do when you're thinking about playing personas and how those things change decision making, you put into the persona that you're playing against, or the persona that is generating a A4 piece of paper and a couple of dot points about how someone should play a persona. You can just say, hey, instead of play as Russia, you can prompt it with that extra level of complexity. So you can say, I want you to play as Russia when their economy is going really bad, or something. So you get this added in complexity of the layer that you're trying to simulate, without having to do all the extra game design and complex game stuff on top. And you can change those things quite easily inside the language model to actually change the persona and the decision making to get to the position which you're actually interested in, which is, how does this change decision making? And you can ask it why as well, which I think is an extra piece. So yeah.
You make a good point, because something like Mark and Ian have been doing playtesting Take That Street, successor to Take That Hill, but a lot more complicated, sadly, by necessity, due to the urban context and the scaling. Is sometimes they play as a red, they call it naive, as in a red force just comes on and kind of walks into blue, and that's a different way of testing the rules than a sort of competent red player coming on. And you might think, like, well, why are you doing that? Because you might have someone playing the game who plays it naively. So we wanted to see what elements of the rules that illuminated, if there was clarification required, etc., and so on. And that could be also a good thing with rule testing, because I've got a bias, being an infantry officer, is that I kind of think that 3 sections work like this, whereas a non-infantry person or a non-military person might literally just go, I'm going to stack everybody in a big blob over here, and the rules might not have accounted for that, because I didn't even think a million Sundays that anyone would ever do that, and that's something that an LLM could help with.
There's one extra piece to this these list of boxes that I thought is an interesting application of language models to really assist in the gaming context and in the analysis component. Like, I think analysis is one of those things that obviously super critical. You want to understand what it is you're actually doing, and reflect and close the loop and learn what you actually did and what you think were the things that made the difference. But I just wonder if there's a huge piece here for language models to assist in that process and my imagination of something like this would be either, putting in, after you've run a game, all of the game data, whether that's all the moves that people have made, or even if you record it, transcripts of what people have said and done. And then that aids the recall of the players considerably, because there may be things that are very subtle within the actual room or at the tabletop which you don't pick up upon, but a language model may pick up upon. So you might be able to feed in all of this stuff that you've done during the game, and then ask, through a series of questions, draw out the actual contextual analysis that might make a huge difference to your learning experience as well. So, for example, asking, what do you think were the 3 main cruxes of decision making throughout this game, or what do you think were the mistakes that were made, and why? Why do you think those mistakes were made?
And again, this is something where this sort of knowledge graph format of sort of encoding up orders and different results from orders in a set way that a large language model can access is something that, again, professionally we're looking at in a lot of detail. Because the other way of looking at it, Dan, is to say, find me the strategic corporal. Which person who, had they not been killed, could have had a second, third, fourth order effect that would have won me the battle, that, from a helicopter view I've got now, I didn't see. but actually, or had that person taken that particular action and fired off that weapon at that time and hit that fuel tanker, which would have stopped that thing from getting fuel, which would have stopped that effect from happening. Look at it all, and because again, it's errors of omission. What action didn't happen that, had it happened, would have been decisive and helping to
or even
plug the gaps in that. Yeah,
exactly, or even asking for replays. Like asking, hey, if you think this decision would have gone differently, how do you imagine that these people would have responded given their current state of play in the game, or what they did prior to this point?
and a final point, which might be getting slightly meta, is how do you now start to integrate the effect of large language models or AI itself into game dynamics? So if you think your opponent is equipped with an AI planning tool, do you reflect that by simply halving their planning time or halving their reaction time? That might be a bit too simplistic. Do you start to take into account the fact that you can hack into other people's large language models and have effects that the enemy wouldn't necessarily initially see? Do you increase their visibility ranges? There's so many sort of second, third order effects of having this technology, and we know it's been deployed by others. How do you start to reflect the dynamics of that on a sort of a war game? I don't know yet. And to go even more down the line, how do you reflect an artificial intelligence system operating independently as a war game? Does it act very, very quickly? Does it act very quickly but not particularly accurately? Again, does it have vulnerabilities you can target? Because in a similar vein, these things, if they're not already being fielded, are really close to being fielded. And war gaming, how to deal with them, probably the best way to start initially figuring out how to counter it.
Yeah, it's a whole subset which is both fascinating and sort of terrifying in equal measure. I do wonder if we're going to get to the point like academia is finding, where you've got students submitting papers written by an LLM, and then professors are marking them using an LLM, and you've sort of got just language models just like completely cutting the humans out the loop almost in that. And are we going to get to that point where AI is submitting the plan, executing the plan, marking the plan, and we humans are sort of just blissfully admiring from the sidelines? It's got sort of shades of the sort of start of June almost coming into it. But yeah, as you say, Francis, if we don't get ahead of it, then the authoritarian types will, and we'll all be singing their tune. Guys, I think that's it for time. I don't want to keep anyone here any longer. So if there's any outliers or anything else, please throw them in now.
Well, one last thing I was going to say is that in the old style of rule-based games, where we went back to a guy called John von Neumann, who created a thing called Minimax, that you're always looking for the optimum strategy. What the Gen AI gives you is the ability to sort of be much more flexible and creative with the rules by the look. I mean, sort of, I haven't taken enough time to play like Dan's played with GPT. I've been watching it much from a kind of a formalized background, but it does give a general purpose tool. In its first instance, it's going to give you roundabout a feeling that it's getting it, but I'm just wondering how much training will be needed from a global model. I so see that you need a local model for each game, and spotting the hallucinations and spotting where it's going wrong, because you know it's going to go wrong in the beginning, feeding it more graph-based diagrams that make sense from a practitioner point. I see no difference between air, land, and sea in that respect, getting it working for the defence industry. No, it's cool.
I think just on like the general commentary around what we have now with language models and ChatGPT can help the wargaming kind of community or industry in general, is it just cuts down a whole heap of time for design and creation of stuff like that. That's, I think, the biggest kind of thing to talk about here without going too far down the what could be technical routes, is just that, if you need to come up with a whole heap of creative copy or start or scenario descriptive terms, or even just handouts, or data that you want to include in a game, like a bunch of different patients with symptoms and cards for representing different kind of states that you want to hand out. Like all of that stuff takes so long for a human to kind of put together. And from a game design perspective, it just makes boutique custom games just a lot easier to spin up. Like, it reduces the cost and the human time to do it so much. And I think that's like the biggest thing, is you have an idea in your mind when you're designing something what you want it to be. The limiting factor a lot of the time is actually just creating the bulk content you need to represent the thing. And that's the easiest thing to cut down on, that is by far within the capabilities of the current models.
Yeah, I think the fallacy is thinking it's going to do the whole thing for you. It's going to write the whole essay, and you need to, asking it to come up with 4 asymmetric factions because you've decided a game has 4 factions. That's a really good limited thing and then you could ask it to look at a number of rule sets for a certain series of games, such as Urban, and say, what are the most popular mechanics? What are the most simple mechanics? So it's giving you a limited answer. If you say, and I've tried this, so hands up, guilty, design me an urban war game, you get back some utter dross, because it doesn't know what you're asking realistically. And it will give you something, but it's not going to give you the sort of the gold standard essay from that prompt. So you kind of still need to have the human interaction, but I've been working on Take That Street for like over 2 years now, and it's not fun, because the fun aspect is the creation. The boring aspect is then typing the thing into rules and correcting that, playtesting that, and all that sort of stuff. And if this can help reduce that down, then instead of one game every 2 years, you could be doing one game every 6 months. Not that I'm going to do that, but that's just an example.
The other great thing, of course, is that with the DALL-E and Midjourney models that generate images, you don't necessarily need an illustrator anymore either, or not to the same extent.
Yeah, and then you can also use the LLM to get you the prompts to do that, to save on sort of errors. I've had some interesting attempts to try and get AI to produce a box cover for Take That Street, which Mark knows about. Guys, I'm going to stop the recording now, and then we'll just do a quick farewell before we can all leave.